I don't think leaders have to create fear. It's already there. So fear and threat seems to be the default in most corporate settings. When leaders to unintentionally create fear is by doing nothing to create safety. The difference between Tesla and other places he's worked is that at Tesla, it's not the most senior person who makes the decision. When you have psychological safety, people are prepared to challenge each other, and then you get the best solution. Psychological safety is critical for performance standards. I've got a very effective team process that always surprises people at how much I can get done. And I would say it's my specialization. The tougher the team, the more in distress they are, the better I perform, the better my process works for them. It's not process anymore. It's not discipline. It's not rule books. It's more around understanding and managing people and bringing awareness and attention together. And that's why the soft skills and ability to lead a team through collaboration, through uncertainty, through a different form of thinking has become so important today and is far more important than control. Do an experiment by not controlling it and see what happens. Part of experiment is to gather the evidence. Don't ask, did it work or not? Because often the first time you try something, it doesn't work. And the next most important question, which is, A, did we survive? And then the obvious next question that comes up is, well, what did we learn? And that's how we shift from being a control environment to a learning environment. So I'm not saying we should surrender everything and have no control, but we need to have both perspectives and know when to use them.
Hello and welcome to ASB's African Speaker Bureau's weekly talk. Today we welcome Neil Bierbaum, high performance coach, team coach, leadership coach, excellent trainer and facilitator. First of all, hello Neil, how are you?
Hi Jay, I'm very good, thanks, and really privileged to be here with you today.
Neil, I met you about, I would say, 10, 15 years ago as a trainer when I was in the audience and learned so much from you at this time.
It's been many years since we connected in the coach training environment, and has been a long and interesting journey. I'm sure it was 15 years ago, and it's been a long and interesting journey since then. And yeah, certainly I've done a lot more of that in the team and corporate environment.
Yeah, it's a privilege, and a little bit background to the people on the who are watching. Neil is actually one of the people who ignited the relaunch of African Speaker Bureau. Some month ago, I found in my inbox, are you still looking out for speakers and curate them and help them to get the audience in the stage of the world? I said, no, actually not. But then suddenly happened, and I'm back, and African Speaker Bureau is back, and we are relaunching in full force. And we have this beautiful series of interviews that I really enjoy, and I think it's tremendous to connect to beautiful people and wonderful people of talent and mind and intelligence. And so today we are with Neil. Neil, maybe I give you a moment to introduce yourself as well. After I've done the first introduction, how would you introduce yourself?
We always start these with what we do. So I've been working as a leadership and executive and team performance coach for the last 20 years. And I guess I got onto that journey because I was always a bit of a seeker, trying to find deeper meaning, something more meaningful to do with my life, and also interested in understanding people and humanity, society. And, we have such great potential as human beings. I'm always fascinated by what we can do, put people in space, incredible creativity. And yet the way we live our lives and, not always get along very well, that always interested me. Like, what's the missing piece there? So I guess I went a bit in search of that. I actually started out earlier as a journalist, I think also because I wanted to understand people. And then I discovered coaching along the way and moved into coaching. These days, I've put both of those pieces together where I create content out of the coaching experience that I've gained. So I have a number of books, YouTube channels, and Substack newsletter, and online platforms, online learning programs. So I've brought the two skills and interests, talents, hopefully they are that, together into these different formats. And yeah, I love creating. I do woodwork as a hobby. I'm fitness, really enjoy fitness, exercise, health, look after myself in that way. and family as well. I'm married. I have 2 stepchildren and a son who lives in the US, who's doing very well over there as an engineer. Very proud of him. So that's a little bit
Wow.
about me.
Yeah, nice. What's the name of your son?
Luke.
Luke. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Luke. I met him, I think, a long time ago. So, but it's,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
I think our kids are in a similar age. So my kids are now
Yes.
29, turning 30 and 27. How old is
Yes.
Luke?
Luke is 26.
Okay. Good.
And he's
Yeah.
about
Wonderful.
6'9" or 6'8" or 6'9". So when he stands in the
Sure.
doorway, he's just under the door, under the doorway.
What is it in meters? I have no foot measurement in my mind.
Probably about 2 meters, close to 2 meters. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Nice. So let's dive into the topic. Neil is very well known for helping leaders to hold the center under pressure and to tell the truth in the room and turn trust into disciplined execution. Today, we'll go from philosophy to practice, scripts, rituals, outcome you can measure in 30 to 60 days.
So really have a passion for getting people to learn to perform better in teams through honest communication. And I guess that's something that is very close to my heart and that I've always been passionate about, is recognizing how honest communication and effective communication is at the heart of performance. And so have spent a lot of time in my life examining that, testing it for myself, and practicing and teaching that to teams. So that's something that really drives me, is honest and effective communication. And I guess I could say, it's definitely something that didn't come naturally to me, that I had to learn as a leader.
Okay.
And I think it's because I had to learn it the hard way that kind of helps to make me effective at what I do.
You've coached executives for now 2 decades. What's the personal story behind your work? When did you first realize that composure under pressure is the leadership advantage?
Early in my career, I started out as a journalist and as a magazine editor, eventually became a magazine editor. And I don't know if people realize, but magazine editing is incredibly intense. So you have to hit your deadlines because you have to be on the supermarket shelves at the end of the month. And the trucks that carry the magazines, if you miss your deadline, they don't leave the next day. They leave in 2 weeks' time. So you miss 80% of your revenue if you miss your deadline. And as you're approaching that deadline, a lot of things are changing. So it was a very, very intense time. And I was young. I was in my 20s still. And I had to learn to manage myself and manage a team and live a normal life while this urgency was going on in the background. And so, that's really where I first learned how to manage myself and people under pressure.
Okay, and in this situation and other situations, was there a moment you nearly lost center, and what brought you back? What changed in your coaching after, or in your behavior is in your team?
Yeah, I think all the time as an entrepreneur. So apart from that experience and a number of years working in the IT space, running an IT services company, I've spent probably most of my life as an entrepreneur, and there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of risk, and so having to manage oneself in under pressure and in that, and often when things aren't going the way you would like or expect, there's a big deal on the table and people aren't getting back to you, for example, and it's going to have a massive impact, or a sudden decision maker comes in and a contract gets cancelled, you can really lose your center over that. And so it was my meditation and mindfulness training, coach training that helped, that I was able to use, and that brought me back. And certainly that's helped me to hold the space for coaching clients who are going through stressful experiences without getting caught into any disempowering narrative, because I've really done that in real life and practice in terms of managing to hold that center.
Okay. Reminds me somehow on the Hojo training that we once did in the I don't know, to really reach out, find your center, and then come from your center back to the strength. About your work, and what do you think people often misunderstand about you or your work at the first glance? What's the truer picture once they see you together and sit with you in your room?
Yeah, probably that I'm quite serious. You know, people might see me coming across as a little bit serious, a bit strict, a bit aloof. My family always jokes that everybody sits up straight when I come in the room, and you know, they feel that sort of tension and expectation. But I think everybody who knows me finds ultimately that I'm very open, honest, available, and even humorous once I get going. Well, I think I'm funny, but anyway.
I think humor is, especially in these times, much appreciated, and it also lights the air in the room. Neil, you recently completed your MPhil in leadership coaching at Stellenbosch, graduated with summa cum laude. Congratulations. Even after 20 years being in the business, you decided to not stop learning and to dive deeper and understand here the leadership coaching from the academic point of view. What were the 3 biggest challenges you had to confront yourself during the program?
Yeah, it was certainly a very interesting and challenging program, and I gained so much from it. And I think, you know, partly what's prompted me to do it, obviously, there's the ongoing learning. And also, I walked away from a potential academic career in my early 20s, and I wanted to complete that loop. And, you know, so that led me back to investigating the academic route, and aligned with, you know, with coaching. This program was available, and it was really rewarding getting involved there. And I think, ironically, during that time, it then raised the question of, you know, earlier choices, like, you know, made me look back at my earlier choices in life and review that, which is quite challenging in itself. And also helped me to see, you know, that I was always going to make the choices I did, that, you know, I got a very clear sense of who I really am as a person and as a coach. So I think that was one. And then the funny thing is that coaching, I see coaching very much as a craft. It's something that I believe should be learned through practice, and is learned more effectively through practice and through doing, rather than through knowledge and learning. However, it is well supported, or can be well supported. The thing is, until that point, I could never read a coaching book or a coaching academic papers. I would just sort of blank over. Now you had to read like hundreds of them. And so that was a very, very sharp learning curve for me. And ultimately, yeah, it helped me to really understand that world and the relevance of it and the importance of it in the coaching world. So, you know, appreciating what happens at the academic level was another challenging learning. And then, yeah, the other thing that happened was, through my research, understanding what really works and happens in the real world. And in parallel, I was going through an accreditation process. Not sure if I should unpack all of this. You know, the MCC accreditation process with the ICF, and I found that it's quite misaligned.
And the third point, what stood out for you? What was you learning there?
Yeah, you know, being forced to do the research into what works and what really happens on the ground in coaching, that was what I chose as my subject for the research paper for the thesis. And it was very interesting to see the difference between what happens on the ground and what happens in a lot of the training schools. So we have this idea about how coaching should be, and it's non-directive and purely questioning. But what really works on the ground and what people find effective is when the coach does offer some input, frameworks, models, tools, etc. And clients are hungry for that, and it really helps to move the coaching process forward. So I found that there was some very interesting dynamics. And the thing about coaching, you know, I think coaching needs to question some of its own assumptions, was my conclusion there. So we question our clients' assumptions. Is coaching prepared to question its own assumptions about what works, or what we believe works in coaching? Have we looked at the evidence enough? That was the question that came up for me. And my answer is kind of not entirely. We could look at the evidence more, and we could progress coaching a little bit beyond what it is from an idealistic point of view.
Well, that's a real great discovery. I think you didn't expect this outcome. Sometimes I think we, especially when we chose a field we know a lot about, that we don't question this field any longer. And I think this is a tremendous insight to never stop question anything that we even believe it's true or that we are expert in. And this helps us to understand our own questions, our own quest for questions, and other people's quests as well. Even if we are engaged with the mind and coaching, let's understand how many other people who are not really deep involved in this have questions about all the procedures and methodologies. Wow, really great insight.
Yeah.
And with this insight, I think it's also quite remarkable that we see coaching. I have my own experience in coaching, that coaching often confronts us with the very things we still need to work on ourselves. Has this happened for you as well?
Yes, very much every day. And it was probably more
Yeah.
noticeable in the early days, but it's more subtle now, I would say. It's, and yes, but it still does take me by surprise how often a client presents something and it's exactly what you need to be working on.
Yeah. Can you share one or two examples that mirror your own growth?
Yeah, even recently, I think I've often encounter executives who need to be more strategic in their approach, and that seems to have been happening a lot lately. And then also needing to uh, network more widely, and both are themes that I've become aware of in my own business as I've
Uh-huh.
been, questioning, like, what do I need to do at the next level to take my practice to the next level? And those have become the sort of the themes that are there in the background, and you're kind of unsure, like, is it really that, or is there something else? And then when your clients are coming up with this all the time, it's kind of like quite a strong voice, like, okay, yeah, maybe I do need to be listening to this as well.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's coaching is a remarkable thing to you never should start coaching if you're not ready to own your own, to first face your own growth and face your own shadows in depth. I remember we once had a shadow exercise. I remember what you performed, what I performed. This was, we don't share the details here. So let's get into the practical steps. So what do you actually think when we're standing here in 2025, what actually is breaking leadership if you strip away the buzzwords?
Yeah, I have a real question around how much leadership is there in the world today. If we look at the direction that the world is taking politically and the increasing polarization, a lot of uh, leaders sort of very much ending up being quite self-serving and not taking people forward in a unified way. And so then I have some really strong questions around that. And then what we find is that the corporate leadership is falling in line with a level of government leadership that is not maybe, the best representation of leadership. So I'm thinking of, the Mandelas of the world. If they were around today, how would they be responding to the situations that we find ourselves in versus some of the responses that we're seeing from our leaders? And the corporate leaders are very much, very often taking the easy route from a moral standpoint and, doing what's expedient rather than standing up for principles and standing up for what's right. And so we ending up leaning very much into a politicized world where people are not, uh, taking the lead from a business point of view. And
It is interesting that you see this and mention this, because I think this is exactly so true in the world. And the fun stuff, if I can say so, is that ASB, the African Speaker Bureau, is attracting at the moment wonderful leaders who are right the opposite. And I think we are on the brink of change where we need to understand that some of the leadership principles of the past are no longer good enough or no longer working. And we need to focus on a few different values. Neil, where do leaders unintentionally create fear? What's the behavior? If you could stop it this week, what would this be?
I don't think leaders have to create fear. It's already there. So fear and threat seems to be the default in most corporate settings. We're always afraid that
Wow.
we'll make a mistake, get into trouble, lose our job, our children will suffer and we'll die, kind of thing. That's kind of always going on in the background. And so if when leaders to unintentionally create fear is by doing nothing to create safety.
Wow.
And, that the fear and threat doesn't disappear by itself. Or if it does, if you have a team where there's where psychological safety and trust emerges quite randomly by chance, well, because it's not deliberate, it's probably quite fragile and it can easily be disturbed. So the behavior I would stop is that of kind of enabling agendas and avoiding honest feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So what I mean by that is like not allowing people to get away with driving an agenda without making that agenda explicit or overt. Sometimes
Okay.
people can have agendas, even if they're well-intentioned, they're not made explicit, and then you're never really dialoguing about the real issue. So you waste time on irrelevant conversations that don't move the needle. So you've got to get to the underlying driver, or what David Bohm in his book Dialogue called suspending your assumptions. In other words, revealing what's going on, what's really driving your decision or your behavior. And for people to do that requires some psychological safety and skilled communication, neither of which happen by themselves. So all of this needs to be trained and contracted into. People need to become aware of what's the underlying driver or assumption that's causing me to behave and drive this agenda. And am I willing to reveal that? Do I feel safe to do that? Do I feel safe to make mistakes? And those are the key things that I think leaders need to develop and engender in teams.
You just mentioned psychological safety. Hot take. Psychological safety, lower standards. Agree or disagree? And why?
When I think psychological safety is critical for standards and performance. There's a direct link between the two. So as I said, when assumptions and our underlying drivers are not surfaced, then you spend time pursuing suboptimal solutions, things that will later emerge as, well, that was suboptimal. And you'll be asking yourself, why didn't we see that? Well, probably somebody did, but they didn't feel safe enough to raise the issue. And I've had an interesting feedback. My son is an engineer in the US, and he interned at Tesla for a time. And he said that the difference between Tesla and other places he's worked, which includes Boeing and a few others, is that at Tesla, it's not the most senior person who makes the decision. It's the science that makes the decision. And what he means is that they'll challenge each other openly based on the data and make sure they're getting the best solution, not the one that somebody wants. And I think that's the key. When you have psychological safety, people are prepared to challenge each other, and then you get the best solution. And you don't have to come back and redo things. You're not talking past each other. So yeah, psychological safety is critical for performance standards.
So how do you create a room where people tell the truth and raise the bar?
Telling the truth needs a bit of a qualification. So a person can give damaging feedback or a subjective opinion, and then something they get very fixed on, then just say, well, I'm just telling the truth. And that can be quite damaging. And we see a lot of that in the world. So giving honest feedback and sharing ideas without fear is what we're really talking about. And we need to be aware of that distinction, firstly. So, being sensitive and contextual. And that said, I see no better way to raise the bar than to raise the level of honest feedback in a team.
Honest feedback.
And a large part of that has to do with how people receive feedback as well. So for this to work, there needs to be a kind of a mutual understanding and agreement that we're acting with the best intentions and having accountability to that. So we need to agree not to say hold unskillful comments or mistakes or wrong assumptions against each other. So if somebody says something to me, they're doing their best, but it's unskillful, instead of taking it personally, I focus on the message that they're trying to get across. And, I give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't hold it against them. If they get something wrong, I don't hold it against them. So all of this fits under the umbrella of colleagueship, which was defined by Peter Senge as a unique kind of professional friendship. And as I've said before, it's not one that arises by itself, colleagueship or distrust. It needs to be explicitly contracted for. So that's something that I do in in the team workshops is getting teams to that point, and then how do they put that into practice?
Hmm. Okay. So what is the word like colleagueship that you formed here?
Peter Senge coined that term probably, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. It's now what
Okay.
we call psychological safety. But colleagueship is kind of the kind of relationship that you want that generates psychological safety. And colleagueship is about kind of having each other's backs, having a level of professional friendship, knowing what's going on in each other's lives enough, and caring for each other, and agreeing to have each other's back and not hold
Hmm.
things against each other. So it's kind of a very conscious, deliberate form of professional relationship that we put in place, which then auto generates psychological safety, we could say.
I really like this, and this rings so true. Um, Brings me to the point that you're actually often challenging the cult of control in the world of AI acceleration and shareholder pressure. What should replace control as a leadership reflex?
That's a great question. And I have a model around that, which I call the 5 touch points. And it's
Mhm.
for supporting emergent order leadership. So it's around leading through chaos and uncertainty. How do we do that? And it's something that I learned from my magazine environment where things were so fixed. And then I went into the IT space where nobody can keep a deadline or keep a project on time or to scope or whatever. And I
Yeah.
started looking at the difference between the two. And I was coaching at the same time. I was learning coaching. And I put this piece together because I realized that there was some key elements to that. And
Mhm.
so part of it is around having very clear outcomes, and we could say vision or purpose, and getting and values, and getting people to understand what that means and how you interpret that. The
Mm.
other piece of that is their level of commitment and care to that. So when that happens, then you don't need processes to control things, because people will become aware of what's missing because they care and they understand what's required. And when I
Mm.
do a workshop on this, I'll give some elaborate examples of that, about how this works in a, in terms of when you create a clear context, everything that's missing becomes visible. So just a quick
Okay.
example then, if you decide you're going to go and climb Kilimanjaro tomorrow, or like in 6 months' time, the next day you're going to be very aware of what's missing. You're going to be thinking, what do I need? Suddenly you're noticing that hiking shop in the mall that you haven't seen before. So clarity and commitment creates new thoughts, questions in a person's mind. So when we put that together with a team, it means that everybody's got their attention on the right thing.
Mm.
But then we need to be present. We need to trust each other. We need to trust the process. So there's a couple of elements to it. So it's very much around clarity, commitment, purpose, trust, presence, care. And if you think about it, these are all sort of psychological or consciousness related, EQ related qualities. So it's not process anymore. It's not discipline. It's not rule books. It's more around understanding and managing people, and bringing awareness and attention together. And that's why the soft skills and ability to lead a team through collaboration, through uncertainty, through a different form of thinking has become so important today, and is
Okay.
far more important
So
than control.
I like this clarity and commitment. This sounds really also true. Commitment is one, but the clarity is definitely another big point. So for all the control freaks in leadership out there, one practice to replace control with clarity by Friday. One practice you maybe could give them to look into.
I would say experiment. Treat take take a project, maybe not the most critical project on your plate, but something less critical, and do an experiment by not controlling it and see what happens.
Mm, okay.
And when I say experiment, part of experiment is to gather the evidence. So when you gather the evidence, don't ask, did it work or not? Because often the first time you try something, it doesn't work. But ask the next question, the next most important question, which is, did we survive? Because often we think, well, if I let go of control, everything's going to collapse. So the real question to ask is, did everything collapse? No. Something happened in
Mm,
that space, or nothing happened, or whatever. And then the obvious next question that comes up is, well, what did we learn? And that's how we shift from being a control environment to a learning environment. And everything starts to go from there. So the core practices, take some projects and use them to experiment with, to experiment with not controlling and see what happens, see what the learning is.
I like to hear the outcome of these tests. Please feedback leaders and team.
Yeah.
You mentioned a few names from leadership principles, writing books, or leaders of actual life. I don't want to get into any names, but maybe describe a leader or the leader who walks into chaos and settles the room. What are you seeing and hearing in the first 5 minutes from such a leader? And what are maybe the first 100 days someone experiences from such a leader entering a new environment?
So I think it's about more than seeing and hearing, and it goes into being. So what are we seeing from them? What are we hearing? What are we actually getting in terms of their way of being? So if you think of, I always like to use this analogy to illustrate what I mean, is if someone's trying to push in traffic when you're driving, you can't see or hear them, but you can feel their energy, and you might feel they're being rude. So then you resist them, versus the person who's indicating politely asks for a space and they're being polite. So this is the power of being. There's no eye contact or language exchange, but you can feel it in their attitude and their presence, and it precedes doing. So as leaders, when we walk into the room, before we speak or do anything, our being precedes us. And so what is the being? So the leader who walks into chaos and settles the room is the one who has developed that in themselves internally. So in other words, they've learned to manage their own reactions and responses to what's going on, to chaos, to uncertainty, and they've learned to become unaffected or less affected by what's going on around them, to be more responsive. In other words, viewing their environment, not reacting. So instead of knee-jerk reactions to everything, taking their time to consider their response. And that's not about denial or suppression or naivety. It's an advanced level of self-awareness and self-management. It's almost a spiritual quality. And so it's about maintaining that. So when you demonstrate that, even in crisis, especially in crisis, that's when you gain people's trust, and you calm the room down around you.
As within, so without. This is so true how much influence we have on our environment. What's going inside is so often an expression what's going outside. I don't know if I make friends with the example, but I often feel that the dog is always barking in the neighborhood. That is a direct reflection of the person who is the dog owner. If there's a hysteric dog, this probably is connected to a hysteric dog owner. Anyway, so this is just that sometimes annoys me, and from objective point of view, always follows me. Wherever I am, there's an annoying dog in the background barking. So from the barking dog to the voice, pacing, and posture, what do you feel a leader should express in their from the impression, from the inside out, in their voice, in their pacing, in the posture, in the first questions they're asked to the team?
Again, I think all these things arise naturally out of your way of being. So another analogy I like to use is, if you get told, let's say at the annual charity play. In fact, I always say being a leader is like being given a role in the end of year charity play. You get told you're playing the bad guy, you're on in 10 minutes, and there's no script. And there's a lot of information. Although it's a joke, there's a lot of information in that, because if you think about it, firstly, yes, leaders always laugh at that and they say, yeah, that's what it feels like, because we're not given the training or the script, which is why my YouTube channel is called The Leadership Script. And the thing is, if I tell you that one piece of information, you're playing the bad guy, you kind of know how to show up as the bad guy with that. But if I said to you 2 minutes ago, sorry, there's been a change, you're playing the good guy, again, you would know what attitude to bring, and your words and your gestures would come out of that one piece of information. So there's something very powerful in the background around our way of being and becoming conscious about our way of being that then impacts our doing. And so that's where I like to work when I work with leaders, is to help them understand, what is your role as a leader? How do you interpret that? What does it mean for you? And what is your way of being conscious way of being that you're bringing to that role. And then all the speaking and the doing arises naturally out of that. So there's no need to learn tips and tricks or develop lines. When you get your way of being right, then the rest of it happens naturally. So it's really about focusing on that.
But if it would be that easy, we would just publish a bestseller with 2 words, just be. And this is the leadership book of the century. But to make it a little bit easier for all of us, maybe give us 2 or 3 behavior protocols for staying steady under fire. So if you are in the storm, when in the executives blindside you or your boss or somebody reports to you, a slipped project or a media that is at the door knocking and want to have some answers.
I think the first is to know your red flag indicator. So the thing that you typically do when you're under pressure that doesn't serve the situation best, your typical reaction, and we all have them. There'll be some phrase or some way that we act. You need to become aware of that, because when you're in the situation, you're always the last one to know. But if you know your behavior or the typical phrase you use, it's much harder to hide from that. You kind of catch yourself, oh, I'm doing that thing. So that would be number one, is to know your red flag and look out for it, or even have somebody who knows you to points it out to you. And then when you become aware that you're doing that, is to presence and ground yourself, because often in that state, we're kind of in amygdala hijack mode. We kind of, it's an emergency. If this goes wrong, I'll lose my job, my children will suffer, and I'll die. And that's how our brain treats it in the background, which is, so we go into panic mode. So to presence and ground yourself basically takes you out of that headspace and into reality. And I often say, look at the building around you, literally look at the sky and see if the sun has fallen out of the sky, and then check the building and see if everything's still standing. Because you're doing 2 things. You're getting out of your head, but also, and you're confirming your very worst fears, or disproving your worst fears. And then you can do a quick breathing exercise and just center yourself. And then, instead of reacting, which is the knee-jerk reaction, choose the most appropriate response. So it's kind of like in the old-fashioned days, we'd say count to 10. It's basically, be aware that you need to count to 10, then count to 10, but do it in a much more conscious, presencing, grounding kind of a way, very deliberate, and then choose your response.
And this is so true. That reminds us just to stay calm in the storm. I just remember a situation that I experienced in management where the whole team was dramatic. And then I just ended the team meeting and just looked out of the window, looked onto the beautiful Table Mountain and said, isn't this beautiful? And I immediately smiled again and was fine and left the room without attachment to all the negative drama that was just unfolding. And everyone looked at me and said, what happened to him? So the grounding is so important, and we have 100 tools of that we can use for grounding, but sometimes there are situations where we don't like to use them, and that's something that we have to often then admit to say, hey, we are part of the drama, so let's stop the drama in us and move on. What's the failure mode for each behavior of these behaviors that you just said?
Well, I think it's probably not trusting yourself, or trusting or not trusting what might emerge in the situation. So I do a lot of work around emergent order thinking and working with what wants to emerge. So we're often we're asking the wrong question about life and reality and business. We're saying, what do I want? But what we want is not always the best judge of what's going to happen. If you go back and do the evidence from your own experience, you'll see that often your choices didn't necessarily work out best. And sometimes things that we didn't want to have happen turned out very well. And so if we go, and then we tend to go, oh, that was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but boy, did I learn from it. It made us what we are today, or something like that. But when we're in the moment, we never allow for that. We never like, oh, well, maybe something wants to emerge here that's bigger than we could have imagined. Might be difficult to go through, but, and so it's about trusting, listening for what wants to emerge, and trusting the process, rather than thinking that I have the best answer to everything.
Yeah. Wonderful.
So what I'm saying there goes very much against the norms in the corporate environment. In the corporate environment, we're very much about needing to show that we're doing something. When something goes wrong, we have to show action and decision making. And I do a lot of work around letting things happen, letting things emerge, and I use a quote by Rajat Gupta, the ex-CEO of McKinsey, and he says he knows that 9 problems out of 10 solve themselves if you just let them. His job is to know which one needs his attention, and he always leaves it as late as possible in the cycle. So I always present that in a workshop, and I say, okay, here's a statement. Where are you on this scale of 1 to 10? And I find most people are like they're trying to control 7 or 8 out of 10 situations rather than 1. Not everybody's going to
Yeah.
be happy at 1, but we could certainly play a little bit in that space from 8 out of 10, trying to control 8 out of 10 to maybe let's experiment and, allow a few things to evolve and see what happens. And
Yeah.
the mistake we always make is we try and evaluate it through the same lens that we were trying to control it. Like, did I get what I want, or did it work out the way I wanted it to? And then we say, well, no, that
Yeah.
failed. But it's not about that. It's about what did emerge, what did we learn, and what possibilities are there. So asking better questions is, opens us up to greater possibilities. And that's a key part of not trying to control things, but allowing things to emerge and treating it as a learning experience as well.
1 out of 10. This is a very interesting, provocative statement. But this reminds me on a great conversation that I had with a wonderful CEO of one of the beautiful working companies. He says, actually, my job is to make 3 or 4 decisions in a year. And this is what I need to prepare for and prepare myself for to make the right decisions. So it's not the daily decisions that actually really steer a company. It's the greater decisions that we have to focus on, and we should not get distracted by the noises. So really concentrate on the most important.
Yeah.
And that's the question, to find out which one of the 10 is the one that you need to focus on. And maybe many people know this. There are in the daily life so many things that can distract you from the importance, the urgencies, and I had some of these days recently as well where I was just carried away with things that actually are not really important. So we need to really understand what is the importance of the day and then focus on this. And this is then, I think, boiling down from the 10 to 1, what really needs to get done today.
Another thing I see people do a lot is that when there's a problem, then people have to go and write a report and say, why did that happen? But the fact is, the real question to ask is, did we catch it in time? Because if we caught it in time, was it really a problem? Because you can't create a system that catches everything. So those things I mentioned, clarity, commitment, care, presence, trust, if those are all in place, chances are you'll catch things in time and then your system is working and you don't need to go and revise it. I've worked with companies where there's a problem occurring and they're having to write a report for management about what went wrong at the same time and then revise their processes every time. And I'm like, but you caught it in time, so then your system is working. And it's a different mindset around that. Again, it comes back to the sense that we always feel like we need to be doing something to solve problems instead of realizing a lot of stuff just takes care of itself.
Neil, this is so true, and I have so much fun in this conversation. You're known for the guy having the honest conversations without humiliation. What's your go-to leadership script for hard feedback that protects dignity and raises standards?
Well, thank you for that feedback. I always thought I was, I'm known to be quite forthright, absolutely, and I was glad to hear that I do it without humiliation. Thank you for that. I would say, the thing is to seek first to understand. So always ask questions and let the person explain themselves. We always assume someone wasn't thinking, but there's always something going on, some reason why they did or didn't do what they did. So hear them first and then watch or check to see whether the person might have learned their lesson without you having to say anything, simply by explaining themselves. Often when you say to somebody, what was your thinking when you did that? And they explain themselves, if they've made a mistake, they'll probably get it. They'll be like, oh yeah, I could have done it differently. And then there's no need to say anything. But it's always keeping it light touch. Only say what you have to say. And then what you do have to say it with permission, with compassion, with empathy. So can I give you feedback on that? And then, here's what it is. So yeah, that would be the approach that I try to take.
What formed you in that way? Did you experience humiliation by superiors, and how did you handle that?
So it's actually a very personal, deeply personal story. Maybe I should tell it. My father was disabled. He had polio as a child. And so he suffered tremendous humiliation throughout his life as a result of that.
Oh,
And
wow.
then he's a very tough guy as well, and he fought against it and he created a life for himself. But then he actively humiliated me, so teased me and so on, because he saw that as a way of protecting me if the same thing ever happened to me. So to kind of
Oh,
toughen me up against being humiliated. The difference was
okay.
I wasn't him, I wasn't his condition, I was very able. So while I understand now where it was coming from, it was quite damaging for me at the time.
Yeah.
And so I kind of worked through that for myself. But to this day, I can't participate in teasing of any sort or humiliation of any sort. Even if people embarrass themselves and it gets shared on social media, I won't look at it.
Mm.
Or if I do happen to see it because someone's like showing it to me, I certainly won't celebrate it and I'll never share it. I
Mm.
have a real compassion for people in that sense. So have an enormous
Yeah.
aversion to any form of humiliation. But
Oh.
importantly, I would say that that doesn't stop me from challenging somebody openly and honestly in front of other people if it's a fair challenge for a good reason. So I'm very much like, if something needs to be said on a project team or on a board or on a committee or on a management team, I'll be the one saying it and I'll be challenging people openly, but it's for the
Mm.
sake of a good outcome. And I'll always do it in the way that I've said. And yes, somebody might take it personally or feel embarrassed, but there's a point up to which you can manage that. And then there's a point at which that's their stuff. So I'll always
Yeah.
take care of my half. And then if people take it personally, well, that becomes their stuff. So I'm quite clear on the difference between the two. And I'm quite clear that, we still need to be able to be challenged, without overtly humiliating people, for sure.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Well, you practice mindfulness for 30 years now. Translate this into business. What's the attention hygiene for leaders in 10 minutes a day?
That's a great question. I would say when you leave a room, check your memory of the physical environment, almost as though you were like a detective looking for clues. So what was on the table, on the walls? What was the table made of? Was there wallpaper on the walls? What color was it? What paintings? What,
Mm-hmm.
what lights were there? The windows? What were people wearing? What pens, books,
Mm.
phones did they have? And it's not about evaluating for any particular quality. It's just noticing, because the better you are at doing that, the more present you are. So if you have this as an exercise, it'll force you to be more present, which means you're less in your head. And being present is where you make decisions based on what's real and what matters rather than what's imagined. So instead of
Mm.
imagined problems, you deal with what's real. And the exercise for that is really just training yourself to be fully present to your environment.
Mm. Give us the routine for the morning of a board presentation.
Probably something similar, but I would say, the important thing is always rehearse, like actively walk through your presentation and actively speak out loud the whole thing if you have the time, or the key points or transitions, and get yourself into the space, and especially your intro, like nail your intro and the rest will go well. So really focus on getting that right. And then the other thing is, when you're doing a presentation, focus on the content and not on your performance. Because if you focus on the
Mm.
content, which because it's your area of specialization, you'll probably get yourself into that flow state, into the zone, and then you'll perform well. But if you focus on your performance, you won't get into the zone, and it becomes a self-fulfilling spiral.
So true, so true. Reminds me on Eckhart Tolle, who says, "I never read from the script because the script is just distracting me from what I want to bring over to the people." So whenever he looks, he says, he looks to my notes, then he lost the crowd. Maybe something controversial, maybe not. Classic coaching training downplays direct coaching. Your research, I think, shows that timely guidance can be effective. Um, When is tell them the right move?
That's what I was talking about earlier around, my coaching. The findings of my research is that people do want input from their coach, their own experience or frameworks, models, tools, and sometimes even advice, which we would call mentoring. And what I found was, sometimes the client is asking for it, but just because the client is asking for it doesn't mean it's the best way to go about it. Sometimes you might still want to get them to find the answer, but there is one key time when it seems to be the right thing, and that is when the coaching clients, in other words, the coachee has reached their awareness horizon. That was the phrase that I came up with. And that is what that means, is that based on the resources and experience and knowledge they have available, they're never going to find the solution no matter how many times you ask. And they're just going to get frustrated if you keep asking and keep asking. And I've had that feedback. So, when the client has reached their awareness horizon, in other words, there's no further they can go, then I think you need to step in and say, well, here's a perspective, here's a tool, here's a framework, here's some experience, here's something you can work with.
Okay, a rule of thumb to decide when is the moment for maybe not so experienced other people?
I think it's, as I say, it's ask two or three times, or two, different ways, and then ask the client if they want the guideline, if they want the input. And then, because that was the other key piece that the research showed. If the client felt that they were free to accept the input or not, then they were very happy to hear it, and it was more beneficial for them when they did accept it. So that's the key piece, is giving the client the choice to hear it or not.
Okay. Let's imagine some teams in distress. When the room is brittle, turf wars, eye rolling, silence. What's the first intervention?
I've got a very effective team process that always surprises people at how much I can get done. There's teams that people say we never thought they would work together. I can get them there. I've done that a number of times, many times. And I would say it's my specialization. The tougher the team, the more in distress they are, the better I perform, the better my process works for them. My process is I interview everybody and gather the narrative, and which I then put together in themes to hand back to them in a workshop setting. But before I do that, in the workshop, I take them through what I call the high road, low road communication framework. And they get to see that actually most of them are, if a team is in distress, it's probably because a lot of people there are taking the low road of communication, which is, taking things personally, making assumptions, blaming, and that it ends up in complaint and gossip, etc. And kind of when I introduce this model, everybody gets to see, well, actually, it's not only everybody else who's doing it, but I'm doing it too. And it's that recognition that shifts them and shifts blame, and then the conversation can start. So that's how I like to work with that.
A sentence you use to surface truth without blame?
It's always about making an ask. So I would say something like, I ask that you come clean, instead of adding another layer to the story. So that's a whole framework I have around honesty and authenticity, but it's asking people so you're giving them a chance to come clean. In other words, you're not saying correct yourself. It's not an accusation. They can save face and they can see what they're doing. And so it's around that. I ask you to come clean instead of adding another layer to your story, to the story, is how I would phrase something like that.
Brings us back to trust. You say trust is a system, not a sentiment. What are the 3 rituals you install that teams can run every day to trust?
The one would be sharing assumptions. I mentioned that earlier. So what's driving the agenda that's causing the disagreement here? And then the second one is turning problem statements and stories into clear asks or requests.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third stage is recognizing and asking this of each other. So if I see somebody not doing that, that I can point it out to them. It's about getting some core language, the team sharing certain language together that they can then use to remind each other of this. And it becomes a sort of a shorthand and gets them into that space very quickly.
In other words, make work human again. It's a nice line, but what does that measure at its 30 to 60 days?
I definitely think engagement, and I have evidence of that, of, improved engagement scores, pulse scores, and with that comes participation. So, one of the key things when people feel they're being mistreated is they will withhold their participation in order to send a
Okay.
message or to communicate. So when you bring them back in, the first thing that you'll see is increased participation.
Okay. What goes up? What goes down? Participation, you say,
I
goes up?
think what goes up is focus on what matters, because it's no longer irrelevant conversations, but relevant conversations. So it's a focus on what matters. And what goes down is, well, exactly that, irrelevant conversations, gossip and complaint. Yeah, definitely the politics goes down
Mm.
and the focus goes up.
Wow. Nice. You're cautious about crusading. You prefer to build the better model so the old one becomes obsolete. It's one of my favorite quotes from Buckminster Fuller. Give us a recent example where that approach shifted a culture faster than a fight would have.
Yeah, numerous times. One that I've encountered a couple of times is in pharmaceuticals. So you get the medical and the marketing. So the marketing team is always wanting to go ahead and do stuff, offer things and have shows and, yeah, put stuff out there. And the medical team has to make sure that they comply with all kinds of regulations. And so there can be enormous conflict between these two and misunderstandings, especially sometimes I've had it where the marketing team sits in one city and medical in another. And so they're not communicating, and this misunderstanding grows and grows and grows, and it can become very toxic. And I've seen, working in this way that I've just described, can bring them together in a very short period of time, working together. And it's not that there's bad people doing bad things. It's just a misunderstanding, miscommunication, and a lack of contact and a lack of meaningful communication. And in the hybrid world, that can be made worse because we're not in the same room together. If you notice, people online and, when there's no contact, people can be more sort of, make more assumptions, be more vicious, more critical. When you're in the room with somebody, you behave differently and you listen more.
Yeah.
So I think that's a factor.
Maybe from an example, give us a prompt, team in distress to turn around, what you saw, what you did in 90 minutes, what changed in 30 days?
Sure. 90 minutes. I don't know if anything can be like for a team turnaround can happen in 90 minutes. It might be 90 minutes within a longer process, something, a particular exercise or, like getting people to talk together and like introducing that high road, low road, or having the conversation. But really, change doesn't happen as a result of one single event or, and I think that's the key thing here, um, with, because team performance and team, it happens in language. So it's kind of abstract. And you would never say to somebody, well, can you build me a house in 90 minutes? Or can you renovate my house in 90 minutes? Well, no, because I've got to go and fetch bricks and put them. So we can kind of calculate that. But because team stuff and performance stuff happens in language, it's abstract. We can't say. You think we should be able to just fix it like that. But we can't. You have to invest time. And if you do get a quick fix, it's not going to last. So there really is it's a process. Certainly a month, 6 weeks, you can transform a team. And then, you need some time to sustain it. And so that would be the key. And definitely, getting rid of toxicity and politics and teams and getting people on the same page and working together, understanding each other's differences and tolerating and psychological safety, all that stuff can be done in a short period of time, much more than people would believe, but it does require some investment.
Okay, teams in distress, hard feedback done well. The exact words you used, the outcome 2 weeks later?
I can think of a recent example, and where I said was in a team environment, and it's a board of trustees that I'm on, and somebody was pushing an agenda, not really even aware that they were pushing an agenda, but it was creating a lot of tension and moving us in the wrong direction. And so my phrasing was to them, I said, my ask is that you come clean on what's causing your bias. And the fact is they didn't, but then everybody could kind of see what was going on. And that person later kind of let it slip what their bias was and basically could no longer defend themselves on the issue. And so the issue kind of went away. And then the debates began to focus on what really mattered and gained momentum again. So they've been recommending a technical solution for the wrong reasons, and then that fell away.
So many beautiful insights that you deliver here. I think we should pay you for the session, actually. Before we close, maybe some quick questions, some quick answers, if you're ready for it. The most overrated leadership trait right now and the most underrated.
Overrated, I would say, is toughness. We see, especially sort of the Donald Trump type of toughness. And underrated, I would say, is probably self-awareness, self-management, and conversational intelligence.
Nice. One meeting ritual you delete forever and one you'd add tomorrow.
A meeting ritual would be letting people talk on the first item that gets introduced on the agenda, instead of putting all the items on the table and then deciding which one matters most and how much time should we take. Because usually we hear something and then the conversation, the whole time is spent on one item instead of really prioritizing that. And what I would add is making sure you get agreement out of the meeting. So instead of just saying, I need this by Tuesday, do you agree, yes or no? So working towards actual agreements.
Wonderful. A time you changed your mind publicly as a leader.
Yeah, I mean, probably the most relevant example now is being on the board of trustees of the place where I live. And, for example, do we put in a borehole or not? Or, various technical decisions like that. And then changing my mind based on new information quite publicly there. That would probably be a good example, yeah.
The question you wish boards asked you more often.
Probably around something like, how can we make people and planet matter as much as profit and mean it and really mean it?
What do you think AI can do brilliantly for leaders and what will it never do?
I think AI, I like to think of it as just a big word calculator. In fact, I don't even know if AI is the right word. I think it should be called plagiarism software, PS. And then, or word calculator, WC. That's how I see it. So it's very good for stimulating ideas, drafting documents, but not for reading context and not for making decisions.
Yeah, definitely. This is what most people need to understand. It's not a decision-making tool. A book you keep giving away and not your
own. Probably The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. So it's a good example of somebody who built a career on the very opposite of trying to control everything.
Yeah.
And a very successful business, very successful software business. And he kept following what wants to happen, what's emerging, rather than trying to impose his own agenda. So it's a very interesting read just as a counterpoint. So I'm not saying we should surrender everything and have no control, but we need to have both perspectives and know when to use them.
The sentence you want your audience repeating in the corridor after a session or after this interview?
Probably the one I said earlier, which is, let's focus on what's real and what matters. And what's real is not what you're imagining, not the problems you imagine, but what's actually happening or likely to happen. And if we look at it, very little matters as much as you think it does. If you really if you really observe reality closely.
Okay. And the sentence you want your audience to remember in the most challenging moments, in the storm or in the years to come?
Probably the same, it's, I think that we get very caught up in what's not real and imagined fears and imagined consequences and imagined dramas. And when you focus on what's real and what matters, and when you really understand that sentence, it's kind of like a path to enlightenment. It's like, well, like not enlightenment, but it is in a way. Like,
Yeah.
when we're really in touch with what real and what matters, we find that very little is real and very little matters. And not that we become careless, but we can have more equanimity, that word that I like to use, and improve our judgment and decision making based on what's
Mhm.
real and what matters.
Okay. If a leadership team did just one thing from today differently for 30 days, what would move the needle most?
I would say, yeah, probably the main thing that comes out of a lot of the workshops I do, which is turning stories and complaints, problem statements into requests and agreements.
Wow, nice. So, Neil, where can people find your tools, scripts, short practices?
So I have a YouTube channel, which is called The Leadership Script. And so I'm putting videos out there weekly on like all my best coaching stuff that I offer to clients. I'm putting out on that channel. So that would be the main place. I do short video reels and summaries on LinkedIn. I have my website where there's an online self-coaching program that you can put yourself through. But the main thing I would say is the YouTube channel.
Nice. Okay. And they find you under what's your handle or your name there? Just Neil Bierbaum, and just they find you?
If you go to YouTube and you put / at the leadership script.
The leadership
So
script.
my
Wonderful.
my phrase there is leadership is a role, and you write the script, and I help you to write the script. And so it's at the leadership script.
Wonderful. Beautiful. Neil, this was a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it, and it was really great to connect you and to learn a lot again, even in this little session. I hope that our audience and the people also learned something. So I think you are available for keynotes and workshops, and people can book you right through. Is there a specific theme right coming out of you that you would like to address before we close?
No, just thanks very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation, and yeah, I look forward to engaging further.
Yes, wonderful. Okay. Neil, have a wonderful day. Regards to Luke, regards to your wife and everyone. And I think we will have another interview, maybe whatever, quite soon.
Look
Thank
forward
you
to
very
that.
much.
Right.
Me too.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.